That's the way this always happens. When you start to see the government getting increasingly corrupt, it starts turning out like Bilderberg. You start seeing them spend $4 or $5 million on an IRS conference. But, you know, it's not just the IRS. It's also the EPA. We've got news breaking today that the EPA is charging for FOIA requests, for Freedom of Information Act requests. And it turns out that in 90% of the cases for liberal groups that are coming into the EPA, they waive the fees, the FOIA fees. But in 90% of the time for conservatives, they charge them fees. And that sounds a lot like the what we just covered last night. Actually, Jakari covered this on the news in more detail. We mentioned it yesterday on the news.
The press shakedown.
Yeah, the shaking down the AP.
Yeah, this is an article, like Dave said, we covered this last night on the nightly news. This was a situation where the AP had a FOIA request to the Labor Department, and they were told that the bill would come to over $1 million, even though it clearly states on the Labor Department's own FOIA request that they cannot charge unless they hit at least 100 photocopies, and then they charge, whatever amount, 10 cents a page or whatever after that. But they said, no, we have to have 2,000 people come in or something like that.
They're going to charge them just for the basic research. They said, we've got to go back and pull this information out. Yeah. Well, they know they've got to comply with FOIA requests if requested. So it's their problem that this stuff is not there,
that
easy
would be
access.
The equivalent, you go to the library and you ask for a book. Well, I'm going to charge you $10 to go find this book for you. That's pretty much what they were doing to the AP. Then they said, oh, well, we really didn't mean that, but we would have took the money had they given it to us.
Well, it's pretty interesting because, like I mentioned with Alex, you saw the AP essentially carrying their water, making some pretty absurd excuses about these DHS ammo purchases. Oh, yeah. And that was something that was, Paul Watson discovered this. He went out and he saw the RFPs, and linked to them. So it was something anybody could see. It wasn't like it was a figment of our imagination.
Right.
It wasn't like we were reporting this from anonymous sources or anything. It was right there on the internet. We linked to it in our articles, and yet the AP was coming out with all this stuff about how, that doesn't exist or it's just for target practice, really crazy stuff. But now that the government has attacked the AP, they're going back and they're actually trying to do some investigation. And now we see this stuff about the FOIA requests. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's one of those situations, just like I said, all this stuff was available free, on the internet. Watson linked to it in all of his articles. And then the first it was, no, we're not buying bullets. And then the excuse was, okay, we're buying it, but then we need it for practice. And then we had people come out and say, well, we want to limit the number of bullets people can buy. And then you had all the criticism from the major networks saying, oh, look at these crazy conspiracy theorists. They're trying to limit the number of bullets that administration can buy. But why do they need so many bullets? Which is very common sense questions. And as we've pointed out, even we did a report about it, all you have to do is go to a local gun store, and they're pretty much out of bullets. Now, it's not so bad as it was, immediately after Sandy Hook. They're starting to get, not just bullets, but also semi-automatic firearms back in there. But it's still a disparity.
Yeah. Well, getting back to the IRS and this EPA thing, we talked about this yesterday briefly. We've got Ted Cruz, senator, calling for the abolition of the IRS.
Oh, yeah.
You got Jay Leno joking about it, but, you heard the thunderous applause from the audience. People are ready for this. But it's not just the IRS, as this article points out, it's also the EPA. And the EPA has been using a lot of the unconstitutional, illegal, according to the constitutional tactics of the IRS in terms of denying people their due process. And in both these organizations, they're writing their own laws. They've got their own court system, and you don't have due process. We have to have some systemic reform here that's not just limited to the IRS. It's got to go across the entire bureaucracy. We're going to be right back. I'm David Knight here with Jakari Jackson.
ProPure is introducing Pro One. All of your filtration in one system, portable, on the go. This is the Pro One by ProPure. You wanted it, you got it. No more do you have 2 or 3 filters to just reduce sodium fluoride. You have a system that cuts out the sodium fluoride and up to 95% of hydrofluorosilicic acid. Advanced manufacturing technology combines silver-impregnated white ceramic with new Aquamedics advanced media for removal of fluoride and other heavy metals, all in one filter element. It cuts out the acid derivative of fluoride. It is the only one that does it, and out of the gates, we have it discounted at 10% off with promo code WATER. This is the only system that in one unit helps reduce or remove pesticides, herbicides, chloramines, ammonia, and chlorine, hydrofluorosilicic acid, the most common form of fluoride not covered by other fluoride filter brands, and sodium hexafluorosilicate. This is a revolution against the tyrants. They love putting the toxic acid base of fluoride into your water. They love the fact that it's an adjuvant supercharging the trace Prozac in the water and the hormones and the other chemicals. By cutting out fluoride, you cut out the turbocharger in all the poison being artificially introduced into your body. This is what I use. It's a win-win. You get a high-quality product at the lowest price. You support the InfoWar. Get your Pro Pure with the new Pro 1 filter today at InfoWarsStore.com or by calling 888-253-3139.
Alex is going to be joining us in the next hour in Overdrive in London. He's going to do a special report going up to Westminster and Big Ben area. I guess they're going to be talking about the amazing parallels between the lobbying scandal that's happening, that's breaking right now in the UK. People crying out for more transparency, more accountability, more openness in government. And at the same time, they've got one of the most closed, secretive, elitist organizations meeting right now in the UK. And they've got both the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer attending, as well as several members of Parliament. What do you think about that,
Jakari? About this transparency, we are under a current administration here in this country that promised to be one of the most transparent in the history of the United States presidency, and they are the most restrictive, censoring, or at least under their administration, journalists have been gone after, even though we saw that nice rhetoric-filled speech from Obama saying, no, I don't want any press to be targeted, but his administration has been doing it not just recently, since he became president.
Well, it's amazing because you go back and you look at the Nixon scandal. I mean, one of the articles of impeachment about that involved that, using the IRS as enemies, you know, going after the press. And yet things are even more out in the open now. You know, things that they kept secret, things that, you know, Kissinger used to be part of these hidden secret wars. And we got a video coming up that we'll talk about that. But they used to hide with this stuff. Now they do it in plain view. And they do it to a much greater extent than they even did when it was secret. So we've got to get to the point where we get some accountability from government. We got to get government under control. It is totally out of control. And I think even with this AP scandal that's breaking, even the press, which has been an ally of Obama's because of this left-right paradigm, even they're starting to feel the corruption.
Oh, yeah, because before it's, you know, it's like they came for the Jews. I did nothing because I wasn't a Jew. And now they're coming after them. They're coming after these these Obama-friendly organizations and agencies, and now they're saying, well, hey, let's not do all this. How about, you know, you don't read our emails and charge us outrageous fees to get FOIA documents and so on and so forth.
We just don't realize the level of the extent of the monitoring and the spying that is being done on everybody. I know that...
well, I think people, I may disagree with that to an extent, David, because I think people do realize it. They just don't care. You know, well, maybe they don't know to the full extent, but I watch a lot of these true crime shows. And, you know, when they're investigating this guy, all they do is like, yeah, we found out this because of his Facebook, and we found out this because of his text messages, and his this and his that. And I'm sitting here watching this. You know, even though they had probable cause to do this to this guy, I mean, they found out all his personal information from his personal interactions. But I guess the average person, oh, well, they can steal whatever they want from your Facebook or from your Twitter, or go into your laptop. I believe you talked about it the other day about the guy. I believe his deadline was yesterday. He had to de-encrypt the files on his computer.
That's right. Or,
you know, go to jail.
That's right. What about the Fifth Amendment? Yeah. You know, we just had the IRS had invoke the Fifth Amendment, which was ironic because that's so many people use that as justification, saying they don't want to go through and fill out the paperwork from the IRS because it's essentially a very dangerous self-incrimination to fill out something that complicated and then be held to every detail of it. There's a famous, well, it didn't get much coverage at the time because we had pretty much a lock from the mainstream media, but there was a case with the IRS where there was a commercial airline pilot, And he had a very simple tax return. He was simply didn't have any investments, any businesses or anything. It was simply a wage issue. He filed his W-2. He paid all of his taxes, filled out his form, but refused to sign it. And the IRS took him to court and won over that.
Really?
And he said it's self-incrimination. And so now you've got the IRS official invoking the Fifth Amendment, and when they compel this guy to go in and decrypt these files,
right,
that's in violation of the Fifth Amendment if he doesn't want to do that.
Exactly. And how, they justified is, I believe that particular case, the guy was alleged to have child pornography on his computer. And I was talking to one of the guys in the back, and I said, that's how it first starts. Of course, I'm not advocating or, supporting anybody who would do such activities, but that's how they're going to get by. Well, this guy had child porn, so we have to be able to decrypt his things or just throw him into jail without any actual real evidence. And that's how it starts. They start, with some of the worst offenders, and it's going to get down to the point where, we just want to know what's on your computer.
What's the way the RICO statutes started out? Racketeering and corruption. They went after the mafia first. They said, we can't get convictions against the mafia because they've got too much money and they can hire too good of lawyers. So what we're going to do is when we accuse somebody of RICO, when we invoke that as a special incantation, that means that prior to conviction, we can go in and confiscate all their financial aspects. Well, fine. Okay. People said, oh, okay, yeah, they're going after the mafia and we know these guys are mafia, so we want them to get legal convictions and take shortcuts. Well, it wasn't just a couple of years, they started going after pro-life demonstrators at abortion clinics, invoking the RICO statute. Yeah. So you got people like Randy Alcorn, who they won against him. They got everything from him, got a judgment against him. He's a best-selling Christian author, sells millions of copies of fictional books as well as other books that he writes. And he refused. They got a judgment. Planned Parenthood got a judgment. He lives on the minimum amount of money that the bankruptcy court would allow him to do, and gives away all the profits to these books because he's not going to give a cent to Planned Parenthood. Yeah. The point being that when you got something like the RICO statute, or you've got these other things where you can always find somebody who's really horrible and say, because we got this horrible person, we want to get them, we are going to now suspend the rule of law, we're going to change all the rules. Well, they're going to change all the rules for everybody, not just for that heinous crime or that heinous criminal.
And this is kind of a nerdly example. Alex makes all these Star Wars analogies. I'm a comic book guy. And what you're talking about, these RICO statutes and all these other things, if you watch, I believe it was the last two Batman movies, the one with the Joker, the one with Bane, the one with the Joker, they enacted the RICO statutes to throw all these mobsters into jail. And then in part 3 with Bane, where they have the guy questioning Commissioner Gordon, who's Batman's right-hand man. He said, you stood by and let all this happen. You threw all these guys into jail without any, real probable cause or evidence that they had even committed any crimes. And he said, yeah, your hands are just as dirty as, Joker's or whoever else's.
That's right. We have to understand that these guarantees are there to protect innocent people. Criminals, so many times people have said it's better to let a criminal go free than it is to punish innocent people. Right. I agree with that assessment. And I think that if we lose our protection of due process, we basically turn the government into criminals, and that's the really dangerous thing.
And we saw this recently with the Boston bombing thing. I remember the bombing had happened, and then just over the weekend, I was, at a restaurant or whatever, watching some of the other news networks, and they're saying, yeah, they didn't read these guys their
Miranda rights.
Their Miranda rights, and we didn't have to give them that because of the circumstances, and we don't have to do that if we feel this person's guilty. We're just going to railroad them without giving them their due process.
Just announce that. Announce that they're going to do it. And what we saw with the Boston Marathon bombing, you saw the press jump in with both feet. Oh, yeah. And no matter how ridiculous, how absurd, how many holes there were in the government story, and no matter how frequently they changed it. I mean, it's just like what Issa said about Eric Holder. He said, they're lying to us and they're constantly changing the story. I mean, they can't even pick a lie and stick to it. Same thing was happening there. No matter how ridiculous it was, the press fell in line, talked about that, and convicted him in the court of public opinion. You don't need that section of the NDAA that denies us our due process when you've got a compliant press and a government that works together to convict people in public opinion without ever having a trial or without ever having any discovery of any evidence. And that always happens.
And just thinking about that, when the younger brother, you know, he had injured his throat. I don't say, well, he injured it, but, you know, he gets out the boat, you know, he looks fine. And then, you know, 10 minutes later, he's bleeding from the throat and he can't talk in the hospital, you know, and it was quietly kind of swept on the rug. It was reported, but quietly so that, oh, yeah, he was not injured when he came out of the boat. Like, well, how did he get injured? You know, it's just stuff like that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's very suspicious what happened to this guy down in Florida who was shot so many times, once in the back of the head. I mean, it's just it's just amazing when you see that. Well, talking about corruption, we're coming up to a break here, but let's see, do we have time for that? Yeah, we've got time for that report. Let's play this report, give people a little bit of a background about Kissinger, because you know this stuff that's going on that went on in South America under his leadership and connection. It was denied at the time. Subsequently, later documents came out that showed that he was very heavily involved. These documents were declassified. But the American people don't know very much about what happened in South America under Operation Condor. So let's talk a little bit about that, and let's talk a little bit about David Rockefeller. And we've got that report ready to run, guys? Okay, let's go to that right now. Frequent Bilderberg attendee Henry Kissinger has been in the news a lot lately. He was given the Intrepid Freedom Award by David Petraeus for his distinguished career defending the values of freedom and democracy.
To present the 2013 Intrepid Award to my friend and my hero, the Honorable Henry A. Kissinger.
Petraeus should be more careful about who he kisses and who he kisses up to. Defending the values of freedom and democracy, Henry Kissinger? Apart from the secret bombing of Cambodia and allegations of other Vietnam War crimes, Kissinger was intimately involved with Operation Condor, a CIA campaign of terrorist operations and assassinations conducted in the 70s in South America.
They put me in the back of the truck. They then put Scotch tape over our eyes, and I was very scared.
Like Operation Gladio in Europe, the CIA used terrorism to fight communism. But unlike Operation Gladio, Operation Condor defiantly operated in the open by the governments and killed more than 60,000 people.
And they had us standing there in a line. And I was the last one to be interrogated. And he, at that point, said, you have to understand that we have to do these things because there are terrorists all over the country who would attack people like you Americans. And so we're doing this for your protection.
We had no contact with any of the people that carried out the military coup, and therefore the coup that overthrew Allende was done without contact with the United States.
Subsequent declassified documents showed he was lying. The dirty war, the night of the pencils, massacres, the disappeared, and death flights. These are the legacy of Kissinger, the CIA, and their South American partners.
There were two parallel universes. One was the life that, you know, you go to school, you go shopping, you catch the bus, and then you get to school and some people didn't come back to school, and then people say, well, he was arrested or whatever. And so it was completely unreal because you just went to school and they taught you math, history, music, and then you came back home to look for your dad, for your friends, and it's just completely unreal. You just start living this schizophrenic life where you pretend that everything is normal and then come back home and then it's back to a tragedy.
The most dramatic moment of the hearing about Pinochet was the testimony of the Scotland Yard officer. On such and such a date, I was handed a warrant and I went to a house. At 11:30, I was shown in. I then went into a room and I saw a man that I recognized as the prisoner. Prisoner, isn't that a great room? The prisoner. And I walked up to him and he stood and I said, Augusto Pinochet Ugarte, I arrest you, sir, for the crimes of conspiracy and torture. And I tell you, I thought, busted.
When Pinochet was arrested in London, Kissinger, who was also under investigation in several other nations, abruptly canceled his appearance there. But in addition to war crimes and terrorism, what Henry Kissinger is most remembered for is his opening to China, which was really about making China the slave labor manufacturing base for multinational corporations, all part of the politicians' and bankers' plans for world government.
We talk a lot about world community, but the fact is there has never been a world community before. We are now facing a common challenge. And the challenge is how to build a world order for the first time in history on a global basis.
China was the perfect place for the globalists to set up their base. A small ruling elite that ruled with an iron fist. Here's how Henry Kissinger did it.
When we started this relationship, there was next to no trade between China and the United States.
Kissinger then tells the audience that what he and Nixon first did was to allow American tourists in Hong Kong to buy up to $100 worth of Chinese goods. He says that was a daring move. The audience laughs, and then he says,
"We have now reached a completely different stage in the relationship."
What an understatement. Arguably the quickest and most complete transfer of wealth in peacetime history. A transfer from the American people to a few Chinese ruling elite. Not from Americans to the Chinese people, but a transfer of wealth to multinational corporations and a few Chinese oligarchs who continue to use the Chinese people as slaves. The same oligarchs that Kissinger's patron, David Rockefeller, gushed in glowing praise back in '73. He said, "Whatever the price of the Chinese Revolution, it has obviously succeeded not only in producing more efficient and dedicated administration, but also in fostering high morale and community of purpose. The social experiment in China under Chairman Mao's leadership is one of the most important and successful in human history." Yeah, Mao and the Chinese communists really know how to treat the underclasses, according to Rockefeller.
I went to Xinyang area in Henan province and Anhui province to do interviews. The survivors there told me almost every village had cannibal incidents, and some people even ate their own children.
The Great Famine came amidst Mao's Great Leap Forward campaign.
When I was growing up, it's not uncommon for parents to tell their children, eat your food because children in China are starving. What we now know is that a conservative estimate of between 50 and 80 million were starved to death by Mao's policies. Mao's social experiment, the Cultural Revolution, the despotism that caused the starvation of tens of millions of people, Rockefeller calls the most important and successful experiment in human history. Kissinger and Rockefeller have exhibited contempt for both the rule of law and for human life throughout their lives. They and other globalists haven't just stolen American wealth. They've used the EU and the euro to create financial crisis in Europe, impoverishing Europeans and destroying national sovereignty throughout Europe. Just 3 days before the 2013 Bilderberg meeting, over 3,000 demonstrators protested the European Central Bank in Frankfurt. We now see the fruit of decades of secretive meetings being held by the Bilderberg Group with the leadership of Kissinger and Rockefeller. For 2 days, protesters have been protesting the fruits of Bilderberg past. Will they now cross the channel and protest Bilderberg in London as the banksters, puppet politicians, and Google plot their next steps? Bilderberg's role in creating European and international banking crises has to be exposed. And people need to ask why politicians and bankers are meeting in such closely guarded secrecy. The mainstream media's owners are there, but not the reporters. InfoWars will be there, and we'll be reporting at infowars.com/B for all the latest updates and information.
That was a great report, David.
Well, thank you. So what do you think? You think some of these people from Blockupy in Frankfurt might show up in Watford, England?
They just may, and I was very impressed with that report because a lot of people, they say, what's the big deal about all these guys getting together? And I believe that's, just one example of the type of people that are meeting there.
Visit Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com. When you're on the site, you can also tune in 24 hours a day to my daily radio broadcast. There's also a free iPhone app to listen to the syndicated radio show when and where you want.